Afternoon. I want to welcome you here this afternoon. I'm Scott Stevens, your county administrator. We do appreciate you coming out and let us present our budgets this evening and then see what kind of questions you may have and try to answer those questions for you as well. I do want to recognize our board chair, Jim Eisenhower, had a conflict this evening. He sends his regrets. He would have liked to have been here, but he certainly will be interested in your comments and questions and those that may come in following this meeting. I do want to recognize our vice chair, John McGlennon, who's here, and Supervisor Ruth Larson's here, and I appreciate their attendance as well and interest in where we are with our budget process. So we have put out proposed budgets for both JCSA and the county as of last week, and so they are proposed at this time. Our board has not had them until Friday like the rest of the community, so they are working through what we've done in them as well, and we've used some of their guidance along the way to get to this point. I do want to recognize Doug Powell, the general manager of JCSA, Sharon McCarthy to my right, our financial management services director, and then Cheryl Holland, our budget manager. And so we should have a group that can answer any questions you have. We are two entities. We're similar to the community, so we do want to present these budgets at the same time. So we think you would have questions about both. Doug works for a board of directors. I work for a board of supervisors. They're the same people, so they certainly have common interests across both entities. And with that, I will turn out one other thing. If we have questions, we are going to bring a mic to you. We are broadcasting this, and we will have it recorded so those that aren't here this evening could see it later if they would like to do that. But in order to make sure they can hear you, if you have a question, we will bring a mic to you so that you can ask that question and they can hear it remotely versus in the room, because we can certainly hear here. It's just a matter of sharing that with those that might be watching elsewhere. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug Powell, general manager of JCSA, and we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Good evening, everybody. As Scott said, I'm Doug Powell. I'm general manager of the James City Service Authority. It's my pleasure to present the proposed FY2026 JCSA budget to you tonight. As I think most of you know, JCSA is the water and wastewater collection provider for James City County, and I think most of you know exactly what those services are. What I think people don't always necessarily realize is just what our system consists of. So I wanted to try to give you a little flavor for that. Our water system consists of 10 water production facilities. That includes the Five Forks Water Treatment Plant, which is our major facility that can produce up to 5 million gallons a day. We have 426 miles of transmission and distribution lines, 2,963 fire hydrants. We produce on average over 5 million gallons a day, and we have 24,500 water customers. The sewer system consists of 78 pump stations, 461 miles of collection lines, 10,532 manholes. We collect about 5.4 million gallons a day of sewer, and we have 26,300 customers. Most of the water customers and the sewer customers overlap. Those are not distinct numbers. And combined, in this context, customer means account, but combined between the two systems, we serve probably about 60,000 people by now. Hopefully this gives you a sense of the scope and scale and size of our system. And to operate and maintain this system, we are reliant completely on revenues that we collect from our customers. The fees and charges that we collect is basically the revenue that we have. We do not get any contribution from James City County. Property taxes are not part of any support to the James City Service Authority. In addition to the fees and charges, we can use interest income as well, and we did have a grant this year, but we are separate from the service. We are separate from the county in terms of our finances. There we go. So this slide presents an overview of the proposed fiscal year 26 budget. Our budget is divided into two funds. We have a water fund and a sewer fund, and you can see that our proposed budget this year is roughly $30,700,000, which is an increase over the $28,600,000 that was planned. This increase is a little larger than what we would normally see, but about half of that is a result of a grant that we received. This next slide is a little more detailed breakdown of revenues and expenses. You can see very clearly here that on the revenues, this top line, the $22 million, that's just the fees and charges that we collect on the monthly bill, and that is the vast majority of our revenue. On the expense side, our primary expenses are personnel, non-personnel operating, and CIP. So speaking of CIP, I wanted to highlight a couple of JCSA capital projects just to give you a flavor for what we do. The first one is the College Creek Water Main Construction Project, which was just recently completed. That project consisted of design and construction at a cost of $1,159,000. It consisted of replacing a 710-foot long pipe that was 16 inches in diameter, and that structure was almost 50 years old. That pipe was critical to being able to serve the customers east of that location. And I think this project is a good example of some of the challenges that we sometimes face. To put it into perspective, this $1,159,000 is about 4% of our total budget that we spent on one project to replace 700 feet of line in a system that has 426 miles of line. So I think, again, that sort of gives you some perspective on the challenges that we sometimes face. We have another project that's planned. This has not been done yet, but we have a project that's planned near the rec center to reroute and replace 3,500 feet of 12-inch water main. That is an estimated cost of $1,685,000 and will improve reliability and resilience in that area. This particular line has had a history of breaks, so because of the lack of reliability, we want to replace this line. The point I'm trying to make with these two examples is that these projects are more expensive than you might think sometimes. These types of projects are not cheap, and it does require resources to be able to operate and maintain the system. The next two slides detail our CIP. I am not going to go over these slides in detail, but I did just want to mention that this is the water fund. The water CIP for fiscal year 26 is roughly $5 million, and the 5-year CIP is roughly $23 million. And then the sewer CIP is roughly $2.5 million proposed for fiscal year 26, with a total 5-year CIP budget of just under $21 million. So that's a brief review of our expenditures. And now I want to turn to rates. So JCSA's financial policy requires that we do a comprehensive rate study every 5 years, and this was the year that the rate study was due. The proposed rates that I will share with you in a moment are consistent with the recommendations of the rate study. I would also note for the past 10 years, we've been doing incremental water rate increases every year, but last year was the first year we had any increase in the sewer rate since 2019. The water and sewer rates, they each have two components, a fixed charge and a usage charge. The fixed charge is a fixed amount that's included on every bill, and it's charged regardless of usage. And the idea behind that is that JCSA incurs a certain amount of cost regardless of whether the customer uses any water or sewer or not. And the bond rating agencies recommend that we have between 25 and 30% of our revenue in these fixed charges. We are not at that level yet, but it is our goal to eventually get there. For the usage charge, which is also known as the volumetric charge, JCSA employs a tiered rate structure that's designed to promote conservation. The rate increases as the customer's usage increases, and these tiers are in increments of 4,000 gallons. So in reviewing the proposed rates for fiscal year 26, let's start with water. The proposed fixed rate for water for fiscal year 26 is $7.50. It's currently $7.52. It's proposed in fiscal year 26 to go up $1.50 to $9.02. As you can see, the fixed rate is projected to increase by a similar amount for the next 2 years, in fiscal year 27 and fiscal year 28, and then it will increase at a much smaller rate for fiscal year 29 and fiscal year 30. For the volumetric charge, the proposed rate for the first tier goes from $4.20 to $4.45, and the increases are slightly larger as you go from the first tier to the second, third, and fourth tiers. You can also see the rates are intended to go up at a similar rate for 27, and then the rates will increase, but at a slightly lower pace for 28, 29, and 30. Turning to the sewer rates, the proposed fixed charge for sewer will also go up $1.50 a month. It will go from $3 and a penny to $4.51. And it is proposed to go up $1.50 per year for the entire 5-year period. The volumetric rate stays unchanged. That's down here. The volumetric rate stays unchanged through fiscal year 27, and then there's some slight increases proposed for fiscal year 28, 29, and 30. So what does all of this mean for the customer and the customer's bill? If approved, the typical 5,000 gallons per month customer would see their bill increase in fiscal year 26 from $50.65 to $55.11, an increase of $4.46. The bill is expected to increase at a pretty similar amount over the 5-year period, as you can see from this row right here. The next 2 slides are intended to show how inflation has impacted the JCSA over the last few years. The slide on the left shows material cost for rubber and plastic products, and the one on the right is for chemicals. So you can see from on this chart on the left, this axis right here is 2020. So you can see after COVID, our costs for these materials, which we rely on very heavily, went up very significantly. And while they have started to come down, they have not come down very much. They're starting to stabilize, but they're stabilizing at an amount that is much greater than what we had experienced prior to 2020. Same trend you can see over here for chemicals. The costs have gone way up, maybe stabilized a little bit, but they are stabilizing at an amount very much higher than what we had been used to. And this slide just shows construction costs. These trends are very similar. One is for renovations, one is for new construction. But again, it's the same story. This is the 2020 here and 2020 here on this slide. You can just see the expenses went way up after 2020, and they really have not come back down. This is my last slide. And it just shows that the proposed increases, if they are approved, JCSA would still have the lowest combined rates in the region. But in closing, what I would say is that while we still have relatively low rates, we do not take these proposed rate increases lightly. The board and the staff believe that we have a responsibility to provide this service as inexpensively as possible. But it does take resources to provide this critical service safely and reliably. And unfortunately, the aging infrastructure and inflation have had impacts on us. So that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take a few questions if there are any. Chris. Oh yeah, we need the microphone. Sorry.
All right, Doug, a couple of questions for you. What is the current status of our water withdrawal permit? And are you expecting a reduction on the next renewal? And if so, what are the plans to make up any difference in reduction of that permit? Several years ago, we were in heavy conversation about a $100 million water treatment facility coming out of the Chickahominy. That hasn't been discussed in a couple of years. I'd like you to comment on that, and do you see that downrange?
Sure. So our current groundwater withdrawal permit expires in February of 2027, so just a little less than 2 years from now. We have been in discussions with the Department of Environmental Quality about what our next permit will be. And while that permit is not signed, sealed, and delivered at this point, but the conversations that we've been having with DEQ, they've indicated to us that our next permit will be a 15-year permit, and that we will not see any reductions in that permit until potentially year 14. So basically the intent is to give us another 15 years or so to figure out what our next alternative would be. And the reason for that time frame is that we're all waiting to see what the impact of SWIFT is going to be. And for those of you who aren't familiar with SWIFT, SWIFT is an acronym, Sustainable Water Initiative for Tomorrow. And it is an initiative from the Hampton Roads Sanitation District where they will, instead of taking the wastewater and treating it and discharging it into the waterways, they will treat it to drinking water quality standards and inject it into the aquifer. With the idea being, with these injections into the aquifer, there'll be more water available in the aquifer for withdrawal. The models are very promising that it's going to be successful, but nobody knows for sure until we actually, or HRSD starts injecting water, and then we can see. So we are in, I guess you would say, a waiting period. DEQ is willing to allow us to wait and see how that goes. The idea being, it's really not fair to ask us to make significant capital investment if we find out a few years from now that SWIFT is successful and we didn't need to make all that capital investment. So we're in a position where we're going to be able to wait and see how SWIFT does before we have to make any further decisions. I will say that if 15 years from now, if we're looking at building a water treatment plant, I mean, $100 million isn't even close to what it would cost. I mean, you're talking a very significant amount of investment that would be required for us to build our own water treatment facility.
Right, just as a follow-up, you have a line item in your budget of interest income. So that assumes that there is a principal balance out there earning interest. Can you describe that? Is that $20-30 million sitting in a capital reserve, and the million is the interest that you
Yes.
pull from it?
Yes, we do have a reserve. We have reserves, and the interest income that you see is the interest on those reserves. Some of those reserves are designated for future projects. Some of those reserves are undesignated, and we need to retain a certain amount of reserves for the bond rating agencies and best practices and those sorts of things. But we've also set up some reserve funds. We have an alternative water supply reserve fund that we've set up that we have contributed money to over the years to try to help offset any costs we might have with future investments that are required. We also have something called a replace and repair reserve fund that we use for emergent repairs. And then, as I said, we have reserves that are undesignated, and then reserves that are designated for certain capital projects as well.
One final question with regard to the reservoirs located in James City County that are owned and controlled by the city of Newport News, or Waterworks. Waterworks is not utilizing all of their capacity. So much of the water in James City County is not being transferred down to Lee Hall and processed. Is there any thought as to entering into negotiations with Waterworks and Newport News to reacquire those reservoirs as a potential long-term water source for James City County?
There have been, I would say, some maybe brief discussions, and the brief discussions I've had, Newport News has expressed no interest in disposing of any of their reservoirs.
Right. Well, we got to provide them some incentive by taxing their inventory that sits in James City County. So we should send them an enormous tax bill every year for every gallon that's in the reservoir. It is a money-making enterprise. It is not a nonprofit. They use it to pay for other city services. It's a business, and it ought to be treated just like any other business in the county.
This isn't a topic that I really understand that much, so this may be a foolish question. But as you're removing things from the aquifers, and you said normally it goes back in with just a little bit of cleaning, but the new idea is to use it for drinking and proper use of that. What happens to the aquifers? It doesn't affect it when it no longer is getting replenished that way, or it's like No, it's getting replenished by rivers and creeks and rain.
So part of I guess, the issue that we have today is that the aquifer is not being replenished as quickly as the water is being withdrawn. So that's the reason for the concern. We are a groundwater-only system currently. So if the aquifers are not getting replenished, that's obviously a concern to us. The project that I mentioned, the SWIFT project, the idea behind that project is that they would inject water that's treated to groundwater quality standards. They would inject that into the aquifer, and the idea being that then more water would be available for withdrawal. Does that help answer your question?
After you treat it for drinking water quality, it'll get injected back into the aquifer?
That's correct. The only thing I would add is that it's not actually the James City Service Authority that is treating it and injecting it. It's another organization, Hampton Roads Sanitation District. They're the wastewater treatment provider for the entire Hampton Roads region. So it's their project. But yes, that the idea is what you said. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll be around after the meeting if anybody has any other questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doug. And again, as Doug said, he'll be around later if you have questions at the end of this or something else comes to mind. So again, I am Scott Stevens, the James City County Administrator. I do want to start with my slideshow will get up, or our slideshow will get up, with a review of our proposed 2026 county budget. I'll let the slide get up so I won't talk numbers that you can't see behind me. Again, I do have Sharon McCarthy who'll be presenting a portion of this as well, our Financial Management Services Director, and then Cheryl Holland, our Budget Manager. We thought we'd let you have some different voices and perspectives, and between the three of us, I think we can answer questions that you may have as we go along, so, or at the end. All right, Latar, I have control now, right? Great, thank you very much. So again, the county does have a two-year budget cycle. This happens to be the second year of our two-year cycle. So last year we were together two-year budget. They adopted, or the board adopted, funds for our FY25 year, which we're currently in, and we had a plan for FY26. So some of that will refer to the plan and then what's being proposed. And normally they are different because things have changed a year later. It does incorporate parts of our strategic plan goals. We've had this strategic plan for some years now. We are working on a process to update our strategic plan this fall, so you'll hear more about that. We have had some community meetings. I think there are a few more planned as we try to move this forward and bring it up to date this fall, but I think our goals will be similar. Water supply is one of those, although that's a JCSA, a different entity doing that. It's very important for the community, as are these other items, and just wanted to point out goal 6 of high quality education. I know in this year's proposed budget, and I'll speak to it in a few minutes, we have not met what the school division has asked of us. And it's not that we don't support education. Our board has historically provided significant funding to the school division. It's just a big ask, and the revenue is not there to support all of that ask this year. So I'll come back to that in a few minutes. When we look at the budget highlights, we have a budget of multiple funds. We will talk about those different funds in a few minutes, but the total for all funds is $389.5 million is the proposed budget. I bring you back to the general fund. That is our operating fund. It's where property taxes go. It's where sales taxes go. It's where we pay for most of our government operations. And when we talk about tax increases, it is within this general fund. So the general fund budget is proposed to be $262.7 million. Why did that move forward on me? Huh? Thank you. Yeah. Did you do that to me, Doug? Anyhow, all right, sorry about that. I didn't mean to take the numbers away from you. I have a mouse up here. Maybe the mouse got me too. Apologies, I thought I had the technology conquered. So again, the proposed budget, the general fund side, is $262.7 million. That is a 2.9% increase above our current year, so at least a CPI type increase in terms of new money for the general fund, and that equates to about $7.3 million of additional funding over our FY25 budget. In our budget, we did have about 11.4 million in requests that were not recommended to be funded. I believe they're all valid requests. That does include a portion of the school division's request. There just wasn't revenue to support that. And I didn't feel with the tax credit that we did not propose this year, that including an additional increase in fees or taxes was the appropriate thing to do this year. So that is why, why didn't you fund those other requests that really are needed in the community? I just didn't believe it was the right time to impose more on our community. The real estate tax rate would remain the same. It's at 83 cents per $100 of assessed value. We do have one fee increase for Parks and Rec related to specific classes where our instructor costs have gone up. The participants in that class would cover that. So there is a fee increase that would cover the instructor costs if you chose to participate in those classes through Parks and Rec. And then we do have ambulance transport fees that we tend to keep up with the Medicare rates. And so those are the only two fee increases in the proposed budget. There is some increase in debt service related to our pre-K center that we've talked about for a number of years, our general services administration building, and a portion of our proposed government center. So we have about a $2 million increase in debt service related to those projects for our borrowing that we have done this year. We do have an initial $2.8 million above what we paid this year for the school division. Their request was more, and I'll come back to that, but it's a significant, at least in terms of that's about a 2.9% increase, so it's similar to what our increasing revenues are that we are sharing with the school division as well. And then our proposed budget does include a 3% pay increase for our employees July 1st and a 1% in January, provided the year has gone well and revenues are there to support a later increase in the year. And as I talk with managers around the region, we will likely be at the low side of pay increases. We did a significant pay study last year. I think we do have our employees to a point where they're slightly above the average for the region, but this doesn't get us any further ahead. It keeps us sort of on the trailing edge of what I think most other localities will do around us. But again, it's what I felt we could afford. We had a request for 19 full-time positions within the county's structure. I believe they were all warranted positions. I think they're all needed to serve this community. We're a growing community. There's a lot expected of us, but I'm recommending 5 of those positions be funded. There just wasn't money for the balance of those positions, so they are not included. I mentioned the tax credit, but I at least want to come back and share with you what I believe that means, at least for homes of median value and then somewhat below that and somewhat above. So in 2025, as we had a real estate reassessment last year, we were talking with residents and we heard at a number of community meetings, could we do something that phased that increase over time? And the Board of Supervisors came up with the idea of this tax credit that was relatively new, I think, to Virginia. It had been around for a few years, but implementing the tax credit. And we did provide a 5-cent tax credit on your property tax bill last year. And so that your December bill showed that credit, your June bill will show that credit as well. The proposed budget does not include that tax credit. So residents will feel a 5-cent increase in their property taxes if the proposed budget is adopted as I have presented it. What that means to the median house, since our median house value is somewhere just over $400,000, so it's about a $17 monthly increase for the median priced house. If you're on the lower end of that, a $200,000 property would be just about $8 a month. And if you're in an $800,000 house, that's closer to $33 a month. So again, the tax rate's not proposed to change, but that tax credit is not in there either. So the increase, there will be something that residents would feel under the proposed budget. I did want to come back to education and just share there is a required minimum of us in terms of what we are supposed to fund in our school division. It's the line that shows about $54 million is what we're required to fund. What we are funding is 84% above that. It's not as good as all localities, but we are in the top third of localities in terms of providing money above what is the required effort from the state. We are considered a affluent community. The state funding formula means that we pay more than our neighbors do in Newport News or Hampton or even York County in terms of the share or the percentage of the school division's budget. The school division's ask of us this year was for $105 million. It was about an $8.5 million increase of the county. What we proposed was $99.3 million, which again is $2.8 million. So it means they are receiving $5.7 million less from us than they would have liked to have had to fully fund their salaries, their pay plan implementation, and positions that they believe are needed to serve the school division. Again, of their request, if I'd given them all of the county's new money, it wouldn't have fully funded what they ask. And while I'm certainly supportive and understand their desire and need, there just wasn't additional dollars to do that. So that will be something I think we would have conversations over the coming month with the board and the community about do we shift something or do something different and take away a county service that would provide more funding to education, or is it where it needs to be? But I know the ask is believe from their school board and our interim superintendent, they believe they need that to fully serve this community. I certainly support that. It's just a matter of availability of funding and being able to do that for them. And then the last slide for me is really just giving you the total of all funds. Again, the general fund is what I have spoken to most of the 262 million. We do have a capital projects fund. We'll speak more to that. I think Ms. Holland will in a few moments. Does show a significant increase there, and that is primarily for the projects she'll discuss and some borrowing. So when you wonder where does that money come from, that would be significant borrowings that we would propose in FY26 to support some of these projects. And it comes down to the debt service fund, our public assistance fund, housing and neighborhood development, our colonial community corrections fund, our specialty projects and grants, a tourism investment fund, and then interfund transfer for that total of $389.5 million that I had shared with you in the beginning. If there are any questions on what I have covered, I'm happy to take them, or we can wait to the end. Is there any burning questions that you'd like to ask at this point? With that, I'd ask Ms. McCarthy to come forward and let her take you through the next stage.
Good evening. My focus tonight will be on the county's main operating fund, the general fund, which accounts for the property taxes and the main operations of the county. It also represents about 2/3 of that total funds amount from the previous slide. The biggest change for FY26 is the removal of the one-time tax credit that was approved in this year's budget, and that was provided primarily to provide residents with some relief and the ability to ease into the real estate reassessment impact. The county used its fund balance, also known as our savings account, to provide that relief. In terms of the other local taxes, the main sources in that category are the sales, meals, and lodging taxes. The FY26 budget is projected to have modest increases in those taxes next year. The tax rates themselves are proposed to remain the same. As for the revenue that the county receives from the state, the $300,000 increase projected is reflective of the state's share of the 3% state raise for constitutional officers. Those positions are actually state positions that are heavily subsidized by the localities. These positions for the county are the offices of our treasurer, our commissioner of revenue, our Commonwealth attorney, our clerk of court, and also our sheriff's department. The other category includes our charges for services, primarily things such as the medic transport fee that you heard earlier about, our recycling program, and our parks and recreation programs and facilities. The increase here is primarily attributable to those medic transport fees, and again, that is something we look at every year to align our rates to match the Medicare reimbursement rates. In terms of the revenue highlights, this slide really just covers what I just discussed. The main takeaway is that there are no changes being proposed for the tax rates in any of the categories. And again, the only fee increases are aligning those medic transport fees with Medicare and the increases to the fine arts portion of our parks and recreation programs. We do try to adjust our fees periodically. We look at them every year so that those increases can be worked in incrementally and not a massive increase every 5 or 10 years. Over on the expenditure side, this shows the proposed amounts by department, and of course the total agrees with the total revenue, which means we have a balanced budget. As you can see, public safety and WJCC schools are the biggest components of the county's budget. Those two combined incorporate about $165 million of our budget, or about 60%. I did want to point out one nuance in this presentation. In the fiscal year 2025 adopted budget column, the funding for the county's compensation study is actually in that bottom line that reads transfers out to other funds and non-departmental. It was placed there as opposed to the individual departments because at this time last year, we were still conducting that study. The results weren't final, so we didn't know how much would be spread to which departments. That has occurred in 2026. So again, if you look at that bottom line, you'll see it goes from 34.1 million down to 29.9 million. That $5 million difference has been spread to the departments. Here we're showing the same information, but from a different perspective. We're showing it instead of expenditure by department, we're showing expenditure by type. As previously mentioned, education is the largest cost, with personnel following. We are a service-driven organization, and you can see that in this analysis. I started off with a discussion about the general fund's revenue projection. The increase in revenue for next year is projected at $7.3 million, more than this year. That increase is about 2.9%, and the proposed budget is recommending the same percentage increase in our funding to the school division, which in dollars is $2.8 million. Personnel is proposed to increase about $3 million. That's mainly driven by a 3% raise. We are also sharing in the cost of our health insurance increase, which is about 4%. There are only 4 new positions in the general fund that are being proposed. The $885,000 in transfers is partially due to CIP. Our fiscal policy requires that 5% of our revenue be used for pay-as-you-go projects. That is to maintain our borrowings so that we don't borrow out of control. It is also driven by mandates. For example, the state has a mandate on our lodging tax. Our lodging tax is 5%, and the state says 3% of that has to be used for tourism. So we have another fund to account for that, and we transfer those dollars into that fund. The $456,000 in outside agency is based on the county's usage by regional entities such as the regional jail, the juvenile detention center, the Peninsula Health District, mental health, and several area nonprofits. And finally, the $225,000 is for increases in non-personnel costs. This is items such as fuel, supplies, equipment maintenance, software, etc. So I've covered what's in the budget. It's equally important to mention what didn't make the cut. This list reflects requests vetted by senior management as a true need, but ultimately not funded and included in the budget due to funding constraints. Of the items not funded, a large chunk was new staff. As mentioned earlier, there were about 20 positions requested. 19 of those were in the general fund, and only 4 are being funded. For the WJCC school division, even with providing the same increase as our own budget, that still left about $5.7 million of their requests unfunded. The county also received several requests from new organizations to assist services that they provide to our residents and to assist with their capital needs due to their aging infrastructure, and we were unable to fully meet those needs. With that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl Holland, our budget manager, and she is going to go over our capital plan.
Good evening. Now that we've gone through the general fund, which covers the county's main operating budget, we're going to switch gears to the capital budget. Unlike operating, which focuses on activity for just the upcoming year, with the capital, the county develops a 5-year capital improvement program, which is often referred to as CIP. This slide provides a summary of the capital improvement program expenditures included in the proposed budget, which span from FY2026 through FY2030. The first year of the CIP, FY26 in this case, is the only year that would be appropriated through the current budget process. The subsequent years, FY27 through FY2030, they just serve as a plan. They are a roadmap so the county knows anticipated capital needs in the near future, and also so that the county can identify possible funding sources for those needs. But again, those later years are not appropriated. The budget breaks down the proposed capital needs by department or entity requesting them, as shown in the rows of this slide. And also we break it down by year, as shown in the columns. The final column provides the total capital amount proposed for the full 5-year period. There are details included in the proposed budget document regarding each department's specific capital projects and capital maintenance, but we'll go over a few highlights for FY26 in the following slides. The county's proposed needs for capital in FY26 total $104.5 million, and they include the following items on this screen, including the new government center, a new library branch for the Williamsburg Regional Library. There's the ongoing stormwater funding that we provide, in particular for watershed management retrofits in FY26. There's also additional funding for the construction of the General Services Administration Building, $1.3 million for the proposed design cost for the Grove Community Park, which would be a new park in the southern end of the county. There's also proposed funding for the construction of a skate park at War Hill Sports Complex. And then there's also a well replacement at the Chickahominy Riverfront Park. The last item on this list is a new initiative. Starting in FY2026, there's proposed funding of $250,000 per year for transit stop improvements. These funds will go towards bus stops used in the county by the Williamsburg Area Transit Authority, also known as WATA. These will make the stops safer and more accessible. On this next slide, we'll go through the Williamsburg-James City County Schools FY2026 proposed capital items, which total $20.8 million. Significant school projects include $11.3 million for ongoing work to construct preschool space, $4.2 million for HVAC replacement at Matoka Elementary, $1.9 million for bus replacements and new buses, and lastly, $1.2 million for certain division-wide expenditures, including security improvements, parking lot, playground, and storm drain repair. Again, these are part of the county's CIP, even though they're for the schools. Now that we've gone through these different aspects of the proposed budget, this slide provides the next steps in the budget process. We're currently at the community meeting. We're currently at the community meeting noted, and the next meeting on the FY2026 proposed budget will be on April 8th at the Board of Supervisors meeting, which will be at 5 p.m. Here in Building F at the Government Center on Mounts Bay Road. That will be a public hearing, so citizens will have an opportunity to provide feedback on the proposed budget at that time. On April 22nd, the board will have a discussion on the budget at their 1 p.m. meeting, again here in Building F. There won't be public comment at that meeting, but the public is welcome to attend. Lastly, the FY2026 budget is scheduled for adoption on the board's meeting on May 13th at 5 p.m. And again, it's here in Building F of the Government Center on Mounts Bay Road. More information on these meetings and the FY2026 proposed budget can be obtained either by calling the number on the screen, which is 757-253-6602, or by visiting the county's website. Please note, on the county's website, there are numerous resources available. You can find the FY2026 proposed budget there, and that document includes the items we've discussed tonight. There's summary information in there, and there's also line item detail. The supplemental section of the budget contains historical and demographic information, and you can also find the county's tax rates and fees in the appendices. The website also includes prior year budgets as well as the county's annual comprehensive financial reports, which contain the actual revenue and expenditure results for prior years. Lastly, we have online an expenditure register, which is a dashboard that gives a digital checkbook for the county. Again, all of these resources are on the county's website. So with that, I believe we'll move into a Q&A.
I want to bring one item back. This is the correct schedule as we have it today. Our Board of Supervisors, well, look at that. I'm still playing with the mouse as I do that. So, Latara, I don't know if you can bring me back. I found out what I was doing, though. They could change the schedule. They could have another meeting. So if the board just wants to have more than just their business meeting discussion following the public hearing next week, they certainly could set that meeting. We would notice it publicly. It would be open to the public to attend. But I just want to say that's what we know as today of the schedule. So public hearing, April 8th here in the boardroom at their 5 o'clock, the Board of Supervisors 5 o'clock meeting. I assume JCSA is following that same schedule as well. And then at their business meeting on April 22nd, they would certainly talk about the budget there and may have other meetings as they so desire. So with that, are there any questions on what we've presented that we could answer?
I had two questions. The first one is, it shows no increase in sales tax, but isn't there a big celebration next year? Has that been accounted for, the 250-year?
You want to respond to the sales tax increase in terms of projections and what we expect? Yes.
Currently, it does not include any additional revenue. It's not built into the estimates that we receive from the state. However, any of that additional revenue could be used to help with additional costs for the celebrations that the county will be putting on.
Second one is, where's a new library? That's exciting. Where's that location, please?
In terms of new library, we've talked about a third branch. We have talked about a proposed government center, and we always talked about an addition to that building, possibly being school administration or some other governmental use. In conversations with our board and the library, we have decided that that would be a good third branch. They had a request in our CIP for a 40 or $50 million request for a new branch, and the library would tell you if the state guidance is you ought to have a square foot of library space for your population, and we're about 30 or 40,000 square feet behind with our two branches, with the one in Williamsburg and the one on Croker Road. So this would put an additional third branch as part of our government center. And so we have the design awarded, so we are designing it. We will have costs this fall, and that's where the real decision would be made of do we move forward at that point where we have a better cost. We are budgeting in the CIP as though we'll move forward, but the final decision on that would be made this fall. And Brad Reinheimer, standing in the back, our Assistant County Administrator, is sort of leading that project. So if you want to know where we are with the government center and library, he would be a good point of contact. But we will have public meetings as we get through the design phase and have some things to share and show and get some community input on the design of the library and the government center as it continues to move forward. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that the county's been very proud of over the years, and rightly so, is our AAA credit rating. And with 454 million in projected additional borrowing, I'm a little concerned because with James Blair and your latest bond issue went out at their lease purchase agreements, and they went out at AA plus. And when James Blair was coming along, the interest rates were practically zero, so it didn't make a difference. But by not having a referendum, is there, maybe you probably can't answer this, but the last referendum we had was in 2012 for stormwater, went down in trailing clouds of glory, and we haven't had one since. And if I'm not mistaken, if you have a referendum, then you can get a discount in the interest rate, which where we are today should be a significant amount of money. And I'm just kind of curious why we continue to do lease purchase at a higher rate.
Sure. I think you mentioned our AAA bond rating. We did go through that last fall. It was reaffirmed. We're very proud of that. It also represents more than just being proud of it. It does represent a lower cost of borrowing for the community. So I think it is important and something we're concerned about going forward as well. We do work with financial management consultants, making sure that as we look forward, that the borrowing proposed, and we don't have 450 million in borrowing, we have 450 in capital proposed over the next 5 years, but it is significant borrowing through that as well. But we have talked with the financial consultants. We've talked with our board of supervisors at their recent retreat and sort of projected that out to say, are we at risk of any of those things that would affect our credit rating? And the answer is no. It's pushing the limits on some of those policies and criteria, but they believe, and they do this for communities across Virginia and other states, that we'll be okay in terms of a credit rating and having the better interest rates there. When you talk about the referendum, I think there are projects we could go out if we were borrowing for, if it is in my opinion, a discretionary project. But if we have to build a school, for instance, and we have to build it, and we put it out to the community for a vote and they vote it down, what do you do for the school? And it seems disingenuous to ask for that if we have to do it because the school children are there. And so people may have different opinions of that, but your point is valid that we would get a slightly better interest rate if it were done through referendum.
No, the AAA only applies to general obligation bonds, which is what I think you're talking about when you say go out for referendum. Any lease revenue bonds, because there's the pledge for appropriation, is always one grade down. So the best we could ever do would be the AA plus.
Sorry, Brad was almost there with the mic, and we'll let him catch up this time. Sorry.
And you have looks like $180 million for our county government center. It seems to me that that should be going to a referendum. Now, I take your point on schools, and no school referendums since I've been here, it'll be 42 years next Tuesday, have the voters voted down a school. And it seems to me that, you know, when you're talking this kind of money, there's got to be at least it's about a 0.5% discount, is it not?
About 1/4%.
A quarter of a percent, okay. That's a lot of money. When you put over 100, you know, 189 million, I think was what you showed up there. And just curious why we're not taking advantage of a reduction in interest rate to save the taxpayers money by putting it to referendum. And I know you probably can't answer that, but our two supervisors here may have feelings about that.
Other questions? Got one in the back, and we'll come back to you.
Good evening, and I want to thank Mr. Stevens and the Board of Supervisors for taking this opportunity to ask questions from the public. The 2.9% increase to school funding, just so the public is aware, it will only cover the mandatory increases the school is required to spend for next year. That includes folding in the ESSER funding that's drying up and making sure we have special education services that we're federally required to have for students. Things like workers' comp, utility bills, things like that. And so my question is, if we're not going to be funding any additional increase to the school funding, how can we maintain competitive in our region?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. As I said, we fund the bulk of the school division's budget. It is up to the school board and their superintendent on how those funds are used within the school division. And so for me, I have had regular conversations with the interim superintendent and the previous superintendent. We have regular conversations with their finance staff and trying to help. But you can't get 14 million from us if we only have 7. And the challenge is we get it from the residents. And so going forward, it's been a problem in years past in terms of compensation. We've tried to address those in years past as the requests have come forward. There has been some help at the state level, but we would continue to say we need more help there. We are expected to pay a significantly disproportionate share than other divisions around us. It is a challenge for us and our residents in terms of covering that. And while I commend the school division on doing a pay study, I think it is important to have competitive salaries and know where you are, and their plan to implement it over 3 years. It really means the ask of us is going to be $6 to $10 million every year for the next 3 years. That's a challenge for us. Our revenues do not increase that much. And so that is something we've got to work through. How do we have better funding or better use of the funds, or different use, not necessarily better. But that is really, I guess, for the school board and the superintendent to work through what to do with the money that's available. We want to be good stewards. We want to provide sufficient funding. There's just not more to give. And our residents had a significant increase last year. There's another 5-cent increase this year with the tax credit disappearing. It's hard to ask for more. And that is a challenge for all of us that are trying to serve the community, whether it's the governmental side, on JCSA water and sewer side, or the school division. So it's something we've got to continue to keep working on and try to make the best with what we've had to ensure we can retain competitive staff to teach our students, serve our community, and provide our water and sewer.
Great. I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, just an observation about the budget trend in general. And from 2024 to 2026, there's a $30 million increase in expenditures during that period of time. Okay? We saw the real estate tax assessment increase by 20% last year. It was partially abated with the 5-cent credit, but that's now going to go away and be fully implemented. So the impact to residents and property owners in James City County far exceed the rate of inflation with respect to their property taxes. And so I appreciate the concern and the fact that you have limited in your budget proposal further increases. The big item that sticks out, and the original new municipal complex was proposed as a $100 to $120 million project. That project has now morphed to $189 million and potentially more, because you won't know what the final number is until it's bid out, but you can bet that it's $200 million. That makes it the single largest capital improvement project in the history of James City County. The single largest project up to that point was War Hill High School, and I believe that was 90 million plus or minus. So I would like to reiterate Mr. Everson's call to put the municipal complex on the ballot in November. You will get a very good sense of where James City County voters are and property owners are with respect to this expenditure. And I'm going to make a prediction that if you put it on the ballot, it's going to go down in flames. All right? And it's not because it's not a nice to have, it's not a gotta have. And we're in a situation where we have a school system that's going to be substantially underfunded and that is not going to be competitive, and that's going to hurt our kids. So my question for you now is, when we were looking at operating a school system on our own without the city of Williamsburg, what was the cost to James City County? Did we save money by going on our own, or did it cost us more?
You know, as we got into the study, again, City of Williamsburg started the study. They did more study of cost for the operating and independent division than we did.
Mhm.
Our study was more predicated on process. How do you do it, right? We did talk about costs. The big driver for us is 600 middle school kids don't have a place to go.
Okay.
So if we separated and had an independent division, and it's unclear how you do that, there's no state process really to get us there. So that's the other part of it. We can say we want to separate, but the process of how you do it is not well defined. So could we separate? I'm not sure. We think we could get there, but it's not defined today in state code. If we build a middle school, and I think that number of a middle school is upwards beyond $100 million, that's a significant cost to us. Outside of that, I don't believe the operating cost, and again, we didn't study it in detail, but the operating cost doesn't change significantly. It's not less, but I don't believe for us it's necessarily more outside of building a new school.
Okay. So that being said, and the city demand for additional remedial treatment or education for students for whom English is a second language, and for other students who require additional tutoring, if those students are removed from the James City County population, does the performance of our school system improve? And does its value in terms of the higher education institutions out there increase? And if it does, then I would say there's an absolute requirement that we separate, because the duty of this board and this administration is to the citizens and the students of James City County, not the city of Williamsburg. So I think that's really the question that needs to be answered is, are James City County students, taxpayers better served in a separate division? And if so, then we need to figure out a way to get there. Okay? So the next question that I have is about the bond rating. And now with regard to some staffing issues. About 10 years ago, Mr. Everson and I did a deep dive on the county budget, and we looked at county staffing and we made recommendations for reductions. I think we ended up recommending upwards of 20 reductions in staff in various departments. And one of the departments that continues to be overstaffed, in my view, and it was our collective view at the time, was in the planning department. When you look at the number of permits for new development that are processed by the planning department, it is 10% of what it used to be 15 years ago. But yet we haven't substantially reduced our FTE count in that department. So my question is, what is it that they're doing that requires that level of staffing when the amount of development is 10% of what it was at its peak? we were building 2,000 homes, 1,500 to 2,000 homes a year. Now it's 200. And for the commercial, there really hasn't been a lot of commercial development activity to warrant a significant amount of staff time. So, that would be one department where there could be savings and you could operate on a leaner basis, and you could take some of that money and apply to the other departments that are wanting. I noted in the budget proposal that there was $780,000 of police overtime that they're suggesting needs to be covered, but for which there's no money. So my question is, well, what happens when you need extra police coverage, and how are we going to pay for that? To me, that's a need, not a want. And so in my view, we've got a situation where we've got to separate the absolute gotta haves from the nice to haves. And we've got a big nice to have that's got $200 million attached to it. And I just think the timing is off for that. And I think the quicker we put the brakes on it, the better off we're going to be, because it's going to be the municipal complex that eats James City County. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Any other questions this evening?
I look at this as more of a case study issue because in some ways it's a deal done, but I think it's an example of what could be repeated if we're not careful. We all traditionally grew up with K through 12. That's what everybody had, K through 12, right? And then was the pre-K program on referendum? I don't know whether it was or not. I'd like to know that. Thirdly, if you're here to stimulate private versus public, the pre-K area is an area in which you could easily stimulate private development of that instead of the public sector taking over what is essentially a private decision for many parents. And number 4, that deal of the pre-K is now being funded by borrowing. It's not being funded by operational, you had to borrow to do that program. And number 5, had you not done that route, again, case study point of view, would you have been able to cover the additional education costs by just subsidizing K through 12 and allowing parents to take private decision so you're not having private companies having to be in competition with the public for the pre-K, which you are now funding by borrowing? Thank you.
And I'm not the right one to answer the pre-K question, but I will tell you my understanding, and talking with our superintendent, is there is a requirement that they have to provide pre-K services at a level is required by state law or federal law to any student that has any type of educational issue. So they have to provide that. And so providing that through our school division, I think, is the way most, maybe not all, but most provide that. Are there opportunities, and are there other pre-K programs in our community? There are. So there are other opportunities, and our school division is not able to meet the whole list. So if their enrollment is primarily for students that they have to serve, they have some open slots for those that may want to attend, but those are fairly limited. So there's still a bigger demand in the community than the school division's able to meet. But a lot of it is what I believe a requirement, not something they have the ability to say they would do or not to do. There was some questions in the back. Oh yeah, the other part of pre-K, and just to follow up on why we were pushing and forward, and we've talked about an elementary school and pre-K maybe before I arrived. I've been here 6 years, and we've talked about it almost every year for 6 years, and probably predates that. We always are projecting growth, and again, they have moderate, low, expected, high. Our traditional trajectory has been a low growth model for our student population, but our elementary schools are full. They are almost 90, 95% full, some over 100 because they have trailers, some less than 100, but they are full. And I've been through a lot of them, maybe all of them, but they are full. But you have pre-K classes in those schools. So what we have felt, our Board of Supervisors, if we would build these pre-K centers, we wouldn't have to build an elementary school. When we started the conversation, the pre-K centers were much less than they are today. I would tell you $10 to $20 million. We're now pushing $40 to $50 million 6 years later. Same cost with schools. If they were $20 or $30 million, they're now $60 to $80 million. All those things are just the environment we're in with construction. But we do believe we'll free up classroom space and reduce some stress on the existing elementary schools, and hopefully not have to fund and build a school in the next 5 to 10 years. The growth is still fairly low in terms of our elementary students, but our board agrees they do need space within the existing elementary schools, and the pre-K centers are one way to do that. So, yes, sir.
Mr. Stevens, question with regard to contributions to outside agencies. I'm just seeing all across your budget or our budget, we're seeing the need for increases, right? Costs are going up, things like that. But a large percentage of these organizations, small organizations, providing services to our, in many cases, less well-to-do citizens, have not gone up at all. Is there some, or can you explain what the formula is for determining, yeah, we're going to help them offset their increased costs as well, or no, we're not going to?
That's a good question. We can go line by line into those. A lot of our outside agencies will be, and make sure I stay on track, will be the jail, the library, those things that are community driven, that community expects. And as their costs go up, we have an agreement of how much we fund with the other localities, whether it's most of the time they are some kind of regional entity that we're providing resources to. When you get into sort of the community, United Way, social services kind of aspect, our social services department sort of analyzes those requests for us. We do put out a call, we do get requests in. They're almost always for some more. Some years there's slight increases, but trying to manage what that increase is something we think you could double it every year and still not meet the need. So we have tried to be pretty judicious of holding the line on that and helping agencies either with resources, time, and effort, trying to provide resources to an agency that if they weren't there, we would spend more on it serving the community. So I think the agencies provide a tremendous resource to the community. We get a really good value for the money we put into them, and that why they don't get more, it's just a matter of not having additional funding primarily to spread it all around to those things that we feel like we have to fund versus some of those we have a little more discretion over providing resource to. But we do talk about that individually every year about the request and the need and what they're doing. And the increases, to your point, really probably don't match the level of effort that those agencies are putting out. We do also talk, other localities are providing funding to those same agencies, right? They typically are regional, serving multiple localities, and we do talk across localities and try to mimic what others are doing. You know, if York and Williamsburg and James City are supportive of an entity, we want to try to be together in our support for that. So those conversations really transcend often the other localities too, to make sure we're all trying to treat them equally. But I appreciate the effort and not having enough resource for that too. Other questions? Yes, sir. Mike coming back. Sorry.
Is there a plan for the 250th anniversary? And was there discussion when you were preparing the budget about including a line item specifically for that so that there would be seed capital in place to support major events in the community? I think that's going to be a real opportunity for us, and without advanced planning, particularly financially, we'll never get there. And so could you address that? And my request would be for at least $1 million, maybe $2 million in a line item to help underwrite those events. Hopefully through ticket sales and sponsorships, you can recoup it, but there's going to have to be a source of capital.
There is a line item for that is significantly less than $1 million. I would have told you it was in the $100,000 range to help with events going on through the year, and then primarily focused around July 4th of 2026. So there is a line item, there is a committee. We have a 250th committee like many communities do. It does meet regularly, it does talk about events. And so that there is, but it's not at the scale which you have suggested. Any other questions this evening? Again, I really appreciate you coming. We gave information of how you can get up with us or find more information. I find more information on the budget through meetings. It is online, this evening's meeting, as well as proposed budget and other information. So thanks again. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to find us.